Access to the stories beyond the bulletins. Reporters after the news on BBC World. "24 hours a day, this is BBC World.
Welcome to BBC News. I'm George Eakin. The headlines. Victory for George W. Bush in South Carolina puts him back in the lead as Republican favorite for the White House. His main rival, John McCain, dismisses the setback, telling his supporters his crusade goes on. President Castro refuses to withdraw a Cuban diplomat from Washington after the US orders him out for alleged spying. And as the counting continues in Iran's election, early results show reformists have made gains against the conservatives. The governor of Texas, George W. Bush, has reimposed himself as the front-runner to become the Republican candidate for the next American presidential election. In the latest primary election in the state of South Carolina, he secured a comfortable victory over his main rival for the Republican Party nomination, the Arizona Senator John McCain. Mr. Bush said it was a victory for a reformer with results, but Mr. McCain accused him of cynical campaigning and vowed to fight on.
And character.
George Bush couldn't afford to lose, but in the end he won decisively. He ran a sharp, aggressive campaign. He labelled John McCain a hypocrite, and he convinced South Carolina's Republicans that he was the true conservative. In victory, he set his sights on the White House.
South Carolina has spoken. And tonight, there are only 263 days more to the end of Clinton-Gore.
If John McCain and his supporters were downhearted, they refused to show it. He gambled that he could win enough non-Republican support to beat Bush, even in the conservative South. He was wrong.
I congratulate Governor Bush on his victory here and wish him a happy celebration and a good night's rest. He's going to need it, my friends. As this campaign moves forward, a clear choice will be offered, a choice between my optimistic and welcoming conservatism and the negative message of fear.
The McCain camp claims Bush won with negative attacks and the help of Christian right-wing activists. They have to figure out a way to fight back. The result announced, the dismantling crews moved in and the candidates moved out. The next battlegrounds are Arizona and Michigan on Tuesday. John McCain has to bounce back quickly, or the excitement he's generated could begin to evaporate. Problem is, George Bush still has more money and the support of the Republican establishment. Stephen Sacker, BBC News, Charleston, South Carolina.
And Stephen joins us again now live from South Carolina. Stephen, Senator McCain lost this one in the last 48 hours, according to the polls. How?
He lost it quite simply in the end because he couldn't win enough Republican votes. That may sound daft, as it was a Republican primary, very obvious statement of fact, but in many ways, McCain gambled that he could win by drawing new voters, that is, independent and Democratic voters, to the polls in the Republican primary, and thereby overcome Bush's advantage in his own party. That didn't work in the end, partly because Bush was so strong with core Republican supporters, also because Bush, in the final few hours of the campaign, did persuade some of these independent-minded folk that he indeed was a reformer too. In a sense, he stole some of John McCain's clothes. So some of these independents voted for Bush, believing his slogan of being a reformer with results. It was an effective method that Bush used, and it was a significant victory.
And the McCain tactics, the negativity backfired, didn't it? Do you think we've reached a peak now of negativity, or will he go on? I notice he's still referring to a choice that Republicans have between experience and pretense. Not many prizes for guessing who he's referring to by the word pretense.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And John McCain says he is the positive candidate with the positive message, but he couldn't resist a few digs at George Bush tonight. And it's the way of politics. Of course, there'll be negative attacks in the future, but I think it's worth pointing out that one key mistake that John McCain made was releasing a political ad about 2 weeks ago, which specifically made links between George Bush and the untrustworthiness of Bill Clinton in the White House. Republicans of all shades, conservatives and more moderate Republicans, didn't like that because Bill Clinton is in some ways akin to Satan within the Republican Party. It was going too far. I think McCain regretted it. He pulled the ad after a couple of days, but the damage was done, and I think it did hurt him in South Carolina.
Both men are already reported to be en route for Michigan, with primaries there and on Senator McCain's home territory in Arizona on Tuesday. Do you think we'll know perhaps by the end of this week, will it become clear who's going to be the Republican candidate?
It's tempting to say so, but of course this race has been very unpredictable. 6 weeks ago, nobody would have guessed that John McCain was going to give George Bush quite such a run for his money. I do think, though, that John McCain really has to win both these primaries in Arizona, his home state, where he really should win, and in Michigan as well, if he's to put his crusade back on track, if he's to convince the American public at large that he really can win this nomination. Because don't forget, soon after those primaries, we have got what they call Super Tuesday. We've got a massive day early in March when California, New York, and a host of other states go to the polls. And at that point, money becomes crucially important to have the resources to put your message out across the country on one particular day. John McCain doesn't have as much money as George Bush, so unless he can re-establish momentum quickly, he's going to be in real trouble.
And very briefly, Stephen, that momentum is all, isn't it? And it lies with George W. Bush at the moment.
It does. We can't help talking about it. Momentum does matter. McCain had it after New Hampshire. That was a stunning win for him. Bush had to win tonight, I think. It was very important for him. He did win. That's robbed McCain of this sense of a surge, the sense of being the candidate of the moment. And now Bush, I think, is quite confident that he can perhaps wrap up the nomination by the middle of March.
Stephen Sacker in Charleston, South Carolina, thank you. A row has broken out between the United States and Cuba over spying charges. The Americans have told Cuba to recall one of their diplomats from Washington within a week. He's being linked to an American immigration official who's been arrested on spying charges. But Havana has reacted angrily, saying none of its envoys in the United States has been involved in espionage, and it won't withdraw any of them.
Another mass rally for Elian Gonzalez, the 6-year-old boy at the heart of an international custody battle between the US and Cuba. Thousands of Cubans turned out, this time in the eastern town of Baragua, to demand the boy's return to his homeland. It's the latest in a string of similar protests in the last few months, all enjoying the highest level of support. The Cuban leader, Fidel Castro, and a host of high-ranking government officials joined the masses in Baragua, but the focus shifted from the plight of the young boy to the latest twist in the row between Havana and Washington. A Cuban newsreader read out the first official reaction to the United States expulsion of a Cuban diplomat in Washington. Although the diplomat hasn't been named, the Americans allege he had links to a Cuban-born U.S. immigration official arrested in Miami on spy charges 4 days ago. Cuba says it's not willing to recall the diplomat, who's been ordered to leave within a week, and accuses the U.S. government of using the espionage issue to try to block Elian Gonzalez's return. This latest twist threatens to undermine the already strained relations between Washington and Havana that could in turn hamper efforts to end the tug-of-war over the Cuban boy. Helen Sawyer, BBC News.
At least 50 police officers are being held hostage by protesters in the Mexican town of Tepatepec. The incident erupted after police tried to regain control of a teachers' college which had been taken over by students. The town's mayor has appealed for the officers' release.
The captured policemen were displayed in the city's main square, stripped of their shirts and tied to each other. They were taken hostage after other officers arrested more than 150 students who had taken control of a local teachers' college after a dispute with the administrators. In the ensuing violence, at least 65 people were injured and several vehicles were set on fire. The authorities claim that all those detained at the college had been involved in the sit-in, but protest leaders said some of those arrested were unconnected to the student takeover. They're calling for all the students to be released before they set free the hostage officers. Otherwise, they say, the men will have to face what they call a people's tribunal. Cindy John, BBC News.
With more than half the results now declared in Iran's parliamentary election, reformist supporters of President Mohammad Khatami are heading for a majority. Election officials say candidates in the reformist coalition have won more than twice the number of seats taken by their conservative opponents. Final results aren't due for several days.
Iran's election result may spell the end of 21 years of hardline Islamic government. But for the voters who spent much of Friday queuing to do their democratic duty, Saturday saw a return to business as usual. There was intense interest. As results came in, voters scoured the media for news of which way the tide was turning. Soon it was clear that reformists were performing strongly. But with the count to go on for several days, election organisers weren't prepared to declare an overall winner. Instead, they were celebrating the election itself, a huge and largely peaceful exercise in democracy.
It's not necessary to tell you journalists about who's running because you know well enough. You've been all over Tehran for some time now. People are so happy, that's why they're voting. They want to choose their own representatives.
And in the bazaars of Tehran, the business community is already looking forward to a different kind of representative.
The elections are great. If President Khatami gains more power, then business will flourish. When Khatami became president, the bazaar business improved a great deal. Europeans and foreigners are coming to Iran more often and more easily these days.
Until now, religious hardliners have used their majority in parliament to put a brake on President Khatami's program of economic and political freedoms. But young voters, especially women, are tired of the state's intrusion into every aspect of their lives, from how they dress to what music they listen to. Signs are they've been casting their votes for candidates who promise more freedom of the press and who hint at restoring ties with the United States. But even if the reformists have won control of parliament, control of the country doesn't follow. Religious leaders have a protected place in government here, and they're not likely to give up their grip without a fight. Carrie Gracie, BBC News.
The legal action against the American computer software giant Microsoft over allegations that it breached international competition law resumes this week. The company's dominance of the computer software market has come under intense scrutiny following the release of the latest version of Windows, its popular operating system, which powers 90% of personal computers.
Microsoft knows how to party. San Francisco was actually the chosen location for the launch of the latest company fair, an attempt to relive the heady days of Windows 95, the last biggest product launched by the company. No less brash, despite the fact Microsoft is fighting in the American courts again next week against the charge of anti-competitive behavior.
I really like this portable computer they made for me. It's about the right size for my desk, but it is pretty tough to get into the overhead bin.
From San Francisco to Earl's Court, London SW5. Here too, Microsoft friends gathered to sing the company's praises. Of course, the antitrust threat has followed the company to Europe. The EU was asking questions about Windows 2000 before it was even launched. There's a real irony to that, because Windows 2000 is a product that's designed to get Microsoft big into a market that it doesn't actually dominate. It's not so much meant for you or I at home or office, but it's meant for the bigger computers that drive the internet and business, the so-called servers. By acting now, the authorities appear to be getting their attack in early, presumably in the fear that even if Microsoft doesn't dominate now, its sheer weight of presence mean it soon will. Of course, Microsoft does not stand alone. Its key partner is Intel, who supply the key bits for the computers themselves. Intel and Microsoft, hardware and software, in a formidable alliance to dominate e-commerce. Microsoft promises lower prices and more simplicity if they get to standardize the internet servers around the world in the way they've done with desktop computers. The only problem is there's less room for creative tension with competitors, perhaps less room for competitors at all. Unfortunately for Microsoft, the American and European authorities actually believe in competition.
There are other products that have been developed in the past which haven't really been exploited in the marketplace, but which actually offered potentially far more innovative ideas than those offered by Microsoft. Now, if we see dominance in this marketplace, then of course many new initiatives will simply wither on the vine, because those people involved in risk capital, in venture capital, will